far.
How's your build going?
It's a long story.
Did you build?
No, we're selling a lot now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ready? All right. Welcome everyone here to the August 25th, 2022 meeting for the Kaysville Planning Commission. We'll start off by approval of the minutes from the August 11th meeting. Commissioners, have you had a chance to review the minutes or any additions or deletions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from August 11th, 2022.
I'll second that.
So we've got a motion by Commissioner Sundloff and a second by Commissioner Lyons. Let's just do a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. We'll go on to the next item. Item 3, conditional use permit for farm animals at 690 East Center Street for Ann and Tom Pritt. We'll turn the time over to the staff to do their report.
Thank you. Yes, we received a conditional use permit for the property located at 690 East Center Street. Before we get into that, I wanted to just talk a little bit for a moment about conditional uses. We do have a new commissioner. We have several people in the audience, and for their benefit, we're here this evening essentially to determine if there are any particular conditions we would like to apply to the conditional use permits that we'll issue. Really, we're not here to determine whether or not we will issue them or not. The way land use law works in Utah is a conditional use is allowed, but we understand that maybe based on that type of use, there may be particular impacts to a neighborhood and area that we want to mitigate by applying any special circumstances to that permit. So we do have some pretty extensive code that provides for conditions and allowances of what those conditional uses can be, how they can be used. And so there may be information that comes to light or some additional conditions that's not accounted for in code that may come up during the dialogue this evening. But in general, the conditional use permits, it's kind of just a formal process where we come here, ask the commission to look at the application, see if there's anything else that we may have missed or want to add, and then generally speaking, they're approved. So that said, again, this first conditional use permit we have on for tonight is for having animals at the property located at 690 East Center Street. The property owners, Thomas and Ann Pritt, I believe they're here this evening. So if there are any questions you may have for them, you can invite them up to speak. But it's zoned R18. The lot size is 0.95 acres, and there's just over 41,000 square feet. So our code about animals and the allowances for animals is here for you to look at. And essentially, there's a matrix that says however large your lot is, these are the different combinations of animals that you're allowed to have on the property. So we, in the staff report, included what those numbers are and on some of them. So with that, here is an aerial photo of the property there, again at 690 Center, and just to get a clearer picture of what that looks like without that blue highlighted area, the property, you can see that. And then we are recommending that you approve the conditional use permit for animals. Again, with some discussion, there may be additional conditions that you could apply, but we did not see any as staff that we would require above and beyond what the code allows.
Do Do we have any questions for the applicants? We'd like to have them come up. Would you be willing to come up and answer us any questions, the applicants, if they're here? Would you like to answer any questions or add to the? If you, could you come up to the podium? And if you could state your name and your address.
Tom Pritt. We have had this wonderful property since about 1978 and through there. And our children were raised on goat's milk. And we've had it, almost all animals except alligators. Anyway, it's been a wonderful area, and we've never had any complaints. And actually, we'll be selling the property, and we're hoping that this conditional permit will, be part of the package that we can convey to the prospective buyer.
Any questions?
So you already have animals there?
No,
Or
we
you
haven't.
took them off and you're trying to get, maybe, you're going to say possibly have more animals, but there's none there right now?
None.
Right. When you had animals in the past, I presume they were just sort of free roaming on the property? Or were they, well, yeah, that's what I meant, but within your property?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I guess related question then is, was there like, did you have it, well, let's start here. What kind of animals did you have?
I don't know how many of you are familiar with this area, but I'm blanking on the name of the gentleman who has the property on Center Street. And he divided it, and Pat Collins had, he was a rodeoer, he was next door to us, and there were others, about four or five neighbors, each had an acre. And they had all kinds of animals. Scally Man, if you remember him with the city carnivals, he had a little train that he drove around for the children. He raised sheep. We had, it was a very pastoral setting for a long time, but it's gotten smaller and smaller. But anyway, what was the question?
No, that's helpful. So maybe I just have a question for staff. So what, I can hold that back if we need to.
Okay.
And we had horses, goats, sheep, chickens, ducks, homing pigeons, rabbits.
Not all at the same time.
But while our children were growing up, and then they all left and had families of their own, and we got kind of old, and we just stopped having animals, but we never had a problem with neighbors or anything. And several neighbors have come by and said, what is this sign? And we've said, well, we we're selling, and we want to make sure it's available for animals. And we have one neighbor who has alpacas around the corner, and there
A
are,
couple doors down, there was a turkey that cockles all the time.
yeah, it's animal-friendly neighborhood.
So your intent is not to put animals on the property before you sell,
No,
just for the future residents?
it's so, yes, that it can, because a lot of people want a nice property that's convenient, like in Kaysville, a beautiful neighborhood, and want to be able to have animals. So we just want to make sure that's going to be possible.
Thank you.
Is the fence still in good condition that it would be able to, like, fence out or fence the animals in so they would not get into the neighbor's property?
Absolutely. Nobody wants animals at neighbors' property. Yeah. Yes.
All right, any other further questions for the Pritts?
No.
We'll go ahead and have you sit down then, and we'll have a discussion. So any thoughts on any additional conditions that would need to be placed on, or is the ordinance as written sufficient in this case?
So I just have two questions that maybe staff can help me with. So as I read the staff report, it looks like, and I think the answer to this is yes, that in theory, an owner within the confines of the code could have 3 horses, 7 sheep, and 95 of chickens, fowl, or rabbits. All together, correct? It's not like, take a horse off, get 10 more chickens or something, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought. So in terms of like conditions existing already in the code, is there, let's take chickens for example, is there a requirement that there has to be a coop already? So in other words, we don't need to say, well, you got to have a coop for the chickens as a condition. It's already in the code. Yeah.
I think it's in here, doesn't it say housing?
Yes, so structures for the care of keeping fowl, rabbits, or similar
Oh, right here.
animals may be permitted in all districts, blah, 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 provided that such structures are located at least 15 feet from all buildings. So it doesn't directly state that they have to have some type of a coop, but
Well, that's fine. And I guess that's helpful. So where I'm looking then is 17-24-3. This point 2 there, I think, is helpful because it's like, if we just approve this as proposed, and then let's say hypothetically, it doesn't sound like this will happen, but maybe the new buyer comes in, has a lot of animals to the max number, and keeps it within the max number, but then, it's dusty, there's odors or whatever, and let's say hypothetically some neighbor says, hey, it's too dusty, it's too smelly. They could come to the city and say they're not doing anything to control that, and the city would then say, okay, well, we're not going to revoke the conditional use permit, we're just going to look at this 17-24-3 and talk to that homeowner and say, hey, let's make sure you keep those things, the odors down, the dust down, and that's it, right?
yeah, we would verify that there is a conditional use permit on the property. We would attempt to verify how many animals that they had, make sure they were in compliance with the number of animals, and then yes, make requests to try and get them be in compliance with controlling the odors and dust and all of that.
Yep.
And if we had continued violations, we would, as we do with other code enforcement issues, just follow the process and try and get them in compliance.
Yeah. So then, just for me personally, in light of that, I don't see the need to impose additional conditions, particularly because it sounds like the neighbors haven't had a problem with it in the past. If issues come up in the future, there's mechanisms in the code to address that. So that's all I have.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I'm ready to make a motion if you are, Chair.
Go ahead.
I make a motion that we approve a conditional use permit for animals for Thomas and Ann Pritt at 690 East Center Street as outlined in the staff report.
I'll second the motion.
So we have a motion for approval from Commissioner Doxey and a second from Commissioner Branch. We will start with the voting with Commissioner Lyons.
Aye.
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 All right, it's unanimous, so it passes. I think on to the next item, item 4, conditional use permit for a major home occupation B, Stony Brook Preschool, located at 930 North Stony Brook Road for Ann Crabb. We'll turn the time over to the staff to give the report.
Sure. So just There we go. That's better. So just to make a correction, her name is actually Anna Crab. So I apologize for not getting that in there correctly. She applied to put a preschool at the residence or at the address at the 930 North Stony Brook Road. It's on 0.25 acres, and it's a single-family dwelling right now. If you will go, you can see right here, this is where the home's located, and then on the next picture is the front. It's a street view of her property. She's done everything she's needed to with the state to get registered and is ready to get started on her preschool. So if there's any questions, staff is recommending approval of this conditional use for Stony Brook Preschool.
Okay. Would you like to say, add to that, or do you, maybe we just, are there any questions for the applicant?
I'm just wondering if she's talked with her neighbors.
Okay, yeah, we come up, we have a couple questions, so. And if you just state your name and your address, please.
Anna Crab, 930 North Stony Brook Road in Kaysville.
Do your neighbors, are they aware of this and they're all on board?
Yep, many of them are going to the school, so they're on board.
Yeah, it seems like a good service. It's also on a corner lot, and that will help with drop-off and pickup, right? I'm assuming? Awesome.
And can you tell us, like, class size and sessions, how frequently you'll have
Yeah,
different groups?
Yeah, I have 8 kids. It's Monday through Thursday from 9 to noon.
Awesome.
Any other questions? So we'll have, let you go ahead and sit down, and then we'll have a discussion here. All right.
I think the typical big concern is pickup, drop-off traffic, which seems to be a minor concern here. I think largely because there's only 8 students and it's a corner lot, so I don't know that we need to impose conditions to address that in my mind.
I would agree.
Otherwise, I don't think there's any other, I can't really think of any other detrimental impacts that would come to the neighborhood, so.
The education of children.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about as high priority as there is.
If there's not any more discussion, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to grant a conditional use permit for a major home occupation B for Stony Brook Preschool for Anna Crab, located at 930 North Stony Brook Road.
I'll second that.
Had a motion from Commissioner Sundahl. Who was the second? Was it
Lyons.
Christine Lyons? Okay, great. And then we'll start the voting with Commissioner Sundahl.
Aye.
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 We have unanimous vote in the affirmative, so it passes. And go to the next item 5, discussion on state, item 4, no, we're done with those, sorry. We're on item 5 now, discussion of the state code 17-27A 403-2, moderate income housing element, incorporating strategies into the 2022 general plan. So we'll turn the time over to the staff to give us their report on this.
Thanks. I kind of have a smile on my face. This is the good news, but the bad news. The good news is that the City Council adopted the 2022 general plan last Thursday. The bad news is that it is not in compliance with state law that was adopted at this last legislative session. So I did know that, but there was a time and a place for a conversation like this, and I felt like it would be appropriate after the plan was adopted. Didn't want to muddy the waters any more than they already were. That said, the state has had a large focus, I think about the last 6 or 7 years, on trying to increase the number of housing units, affordable housing, moderate income housing, which is different than affordable housing. And they've put many different variations of code in place. The previous general plan that we had was from 2019, And I think actually the reason why we had the 2019 general plan is because state law mandated that we amend our general plan and adopt some of these items from state code in order to accomplish what they would like to see with the affordable and the affordability of housing. So we went through that process in 2019, adopted these items. The state has changed code a couple different times since that. And most recently, this past session, I think with each time this comes to them, they get a little bit more forceful and adamant with what they're asking cities to do. And in this past session, they increased the menu items that are available to cities, but also changed some of the language. And the expectation is that we would have in place by October 1st a general plan that would adopt the, I believe we need to have 5 items from the list. And so the conversation I thought that we would have this evening would be, hey, here's the 9 that we selected from 2019. The state code allows for, there's 24 items, I think. I have those on slides that we could go through if you would like. They're also in your packet. But what I was hoping for this evening was some direction from the Planning Commission on items that you feel would be appropriate for Kaysville to incorporate into the general plan, and items that you feel would be ones that we could accomplish as well. And then based on kind of consensus tonight on those 5 items, I would bring back at one of the next Planning Commission meetings a general plan amendment. We'd have to have a public hearing, and then we would take that forward to the City Council for adoption. So I have not been through a process yet where I myself have completed a moderate income housing report. That's also due to the state this year. And I believe that their intent is, the reporting that's been in the past has really not held a lot of meaning. And I believe that their intent now is for, and they've even hired a full-time staff that's going to come and look at our general plans, the progress that we're making on these items that were adopted, to see how much progress we're making. So at the end of all of this, again, by October 1st, hopefully we have something in place. We'll report to the state where we're at this current year, and then that will be a baseline for our future year reports. And so they are recommending to us that if you're going to adopt a menu item, it should be one that you feel like will be supported, and that you know, elected officials will follow through on, and one that we could actually maybe see some progress in. So that said, I would just open it up to discussion for the commission to see, you know, which of those items you feel like may be appropriate to incorporate into the general plan.
So, Melinda, I'll kind of jump in. So I went through this with the county when we did our community development block grant 5-year plan for the county, because we had to do the impediments for fair housing. So that date is there with the county for the city. So they had to look at each city anyway and talk about that. So one of the things I think that needs to be addressed in looking at each of the cities is the regulatory. And that's just, you know, what is the zoning? Is it allowed? How is that impacting the growth of housing? I mean, I think that's one of the areas that county-wide we saw that there is an impact on housing. Is density allowed in any area, and what type of density? And our cities passing it. I think the other thing that should be addressed is what is the forecasting. We looked out at all 15 cities in the county, and of the 15 cities, only 2 were actually doing 5-year forecasting on their population and housing needs. And so I think that is critical to also reflect in your regulatory, because if you're not forecasting what your population is going to look like, you're not able then to adapt what your regulatory is going to look like. And so when the state comes back on us with these type of regulations, you're left hanging, kind of going, well, wait a second, why is the state doing this? Well, the state's doing this because they want us to look forward. And they're getting pushback from developers who are saying, you know, we go into a county and 13 of your 15 cities aren't even doing any kind of, you know, lookout and kind of preparation. I think the last one is, and this was kind of evident, was how are we going to meet the moderate income housing? And I think we need to address that. You know, it is an issue. I'm working on moderate income housing right now in the development nationally, and it's everywhere. And there's a huge issue for it in both in the rental market as well as in the buying market.
Do we have data for, like, on like item 9, what the density would have to be able to get, like, make it so it would be moderate income?
Yes.
No, well, I'll let.
So, and I'll defer. I mean, yeah, it comes from HUD, and it's the Clearfield, Ogden Clearfield MSA from HUD, and it demonstrates what the moderate income looks like at 80, 50, and 30%. And so an individual earning 80% of the income technically can only spend median income
The county?
for the county,
Not the state?
not the state.
Okay.
Well, it depends on what you choose, but the state here we've chosen to use the Ogden Clearfield MSA, and
Well,
so
that'll keep it down even more.
we have a high median income.
Yes.
But you look at that, but a person earning that with a four-person family technically is only supposed to spend like less than 35% of their income. But the rents here right now, you go look at what rents are in like Farmington, you've got a one-bedroom apartment renting at $2,500.
Yeah.
And so an individual making $18 an hour is not able to even rent an apartment at that rate. So it's a big issue.
Well, I think part of the question, though, was like, what quantifies as density to assure the production of moderate income housing, right? Was that part of the question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, you know, I mean, we get pushback right now for, you know, on the west side for R18. I mean, and I'm thinking that we'd have to be like a lot more dense than that to even get close to get the lots, you know, the housing to be moderately affordable.
And I'll kind of echo that, Mr. Chairman, because if you really look at housing, you're supposed to have housing choice and housing availability spread throughout your zones. And that becomes very apparent because as you're delivering services to your city, you don't want all of your affordable housing or all of your density in one area because it overburdens parts of your city. You want that pushed throughout an area so your zoning can reflect that. And I think we're seeing that in our city where we have overabundance in one area. And I think there needs to be a rebalancing of that to a certain extent.
I have a question. So that previous slide you had was, so that was in the 2019 general plan. And that was what was incorporated so that it would conform with state mandate at that time. Now we have more. I guess my first question is, I think some of these things are already in, maybe not verbatim, you know, quotes, but certainly the concepts are in the new plan that just got adopted. So what is it that we feel is missing in the new plan?
I don't think these are in the new general plan. I mean, so we have a section, each of those chapters have goals and objectives. Mm-hmm. This should be one of the goals and objectives, and there's not anything in the plan that comes close to this. My conversation with Bill Kobabe, who's hired to do the compliance, has said it needs to be exact word to word from the state code into the general plan.
Who said that?
the individual the state's hired that's going to be doing all the compliance checking on the general plan
Interesting.
Are there
and the
penalties if
reporting.
cities don't comply with this new law?
Yeah, what's the carrot and the stick here?
Yeah, carrot stick.
So that's a good question, and to, again, just kind of take a walk back in history through this. So several years ago, the state said, we're going to ask you nicely. Then the state said, we're going to ask you, and now the state's saying, we're going to tell you. We will tell you whether or not you can allow accessory dwelling units in your community. We're telling you, you will allow them, right? That's what happened last year. They're now telling us that if we do not have a general plan that's in compliance, and then if we're not making progress, there's a few penalties. One is that they threatened last year to take away some of our road funding. So each year the city gets what's called B and C class road funds. It comes from a couple different sources, but that's one of the major ways the city pays for road rehabilitation and maintenance. This year, what they have said is that if we are not in compliance, we will be ineligible to apply for certain, I left my notebook on my desk, but which would delineate that a little bit more. Yeah, if you want to go grab it, but, or Wilf might know right off the top of his head, but they're saying, look, there's all of these funding sources, mostly for road projects, but, you know, grant funding that comes through the state, through Wasatch Front Regional Council. If you're not in compliance, don't apply. If you're in compliance, apply. If you're in compliance and you're exceeding the expectations, you get bonus points on your application. So again, at this point, they're kind of telling us, but they're also telling us that if cities don't start making the kind of progress that they expect, the next steps would be more harsh and they will force us. I think it's a likely outcome that they would come back and say, all right, now you get to allow detached accessory dwelling units in your community. I mean, I'm not a fortune teller. I can't look into the future and say exactly what it is that they will do, but I can say there is no greater conversation going on at the elected official level at the state and the state capitol than this. And it's been ongoing for 5 or 6, 7 years now. The problem hasn't gotten any better. It's only gotten worse, actually. And there's frankly frustration, I think, on the parties of elected officials, the locally elected officials. There's frustration with staff because, you know, we attend these public hearings every time we schedule one, and we hear what the residents say. And apart from when I lived in Moab, I've yet to be in a community that would embrace things like affordable housing, that would embrace things like housing affordability and modern income housing and density and townhomes. It's just not something that, generally speaking, the public comes and supports during these public hearings.
And I'll echo that, Melinda. I mean, having been on your side of the fence in other communities, I mean, no matter where you go, you have a certain amount of, and I think it's partly the perception of what affordable housing is. I mean, it's really attainable housing, and it's for those individuals in the community, like your teachers, your firefighters, your police officers, who you do want living in your community, who now have to live out in the ring counties and drive 45 minutes to an hour into your community to serve and live in your community, who can't afford housing in here. And that's the type of housing that needs to be built in these communities, and it's really critical to have that income level living in the communities. They've been forced out. I mean, you have teachers that are commuting an hour and a half to come into Davis County from other areas, from Tooele County and from Box Elder County. Same thing for firefighters and our public safety, because that's where the affordable housing is. And so you look at the median price of a house in Kaysville. I mean, you're talking $800,000, $900,000 now, and that's not an affordable house for somebody making $35,000, $40,000 a year as a beginning teacher or a firefighter or a police officer. And that's really, that's the type of thing that needs to be addressed. I've seen this in the several communities I've worked in doing attainable housing, and it's a perception of those people, and it becomes an othering. We don't want those people in our community, and that's the problem.
But that's our kids and grandkids that
Correct.
are trying to get attainable housing that in this town, we have not done a good job of allowing it. The politics don't allow it. The Planning Commission consistently has recommended more attainable housing solutions that get shot down at the City Council because the politics are the politics. And so for me, we need to come up with some concrete steps that make it easy for the City Council to adopt affordable or attainable housing solutions and not let the politics make it go the other way.
So in the spirit of the current general plan with the multi-use, would that align with number 9, rezoning for densities?
You mean the mixed use or the?
Mixed use, sorry, mixed use.
Or multifamily?
Mixed use.
I think the answer is yes. I think both of those would. I think.
But we need to spell it out.
Well,
and not just imply it, right?
We need to choose and spell out in the code which one, or sorry, in the general plan, which ones we are electing to implement. But then again, you know, the comment back from the state is, because I asked them, well, what happens if we pick rezone for densities and then we have these items come forward and they don't get approved? And the response was, don't pick that one. I mean, what
that's
stick,
where the forecasting comes
well,
in.
right, and again, like what stick they're gonna hit us with, I don't know. How hard will it hurt when they do hit us? I don't know. I can't tell you those things.
And-
All I can tell you is that state code is saying we have to have these 5 items in our general plan by October 1st. I don't feel like they are adequately addressed in the general plan. So I'm here to get, you know, the input from the commissioners on which one you feel like will work. And then we take that eventually to the city council, and ultimately it's up to them as to whether or not they choose to amend the general plan and adopt those items. You know, they could look at that and say, oh, we don't like those, we want to put different ones in. But my job is to get that to them and hopefully become in compliance. You know, I think this is a huge struggle for all of the cities across the state. I think most cities are feeling some of the same sentiment that I just outlined, like, well, but our residents don't want it, or, you know, we're doing more than our fair share. What is our fair share? I don't know, but I mean, I can tell you this came from a community that had consistently, they had more than what they needed. So, you know, if they apply, they'll get the bonus points on the applications and they'll get the funding. If we're not in compliance, again, may not bother to apply for funding. I don't know if we care. Some council members have asked me, do we care? Well, I care to get us into compliance with state law. Whether or not they care to come into compliance, that's their prerogative, you know, but I feel like our role as staff and then as the planning commission is to recommend to them which items we feel like would work, and then it's up to them as to what they do with that.
So just a context question here, Melinda. The 2019 Moderate Income Housing Plan, that was not incorporated into our currently now adopted general plan. But do we still have that plan? I mean, it's still adopted, the 2019 Moderate Income Housing Plan, right? It's just it's not in the general plan, which it needs to be according to the state code. Now we have to have an element in the general plan.
Yeah, I think our housing element in the 2022 general plan is actually pretty weak. And again, like I've spent some time in the last week or so looking at some of the data, and I understand why we got there, right? Like we did a survey of the residents. You know, nobody's saying, hey, we want to have 6-story apartment buildings in Kaysville. That's not what they're saying, and I don't think the state is saying that we have to have that here either. But at the same time, yeah, I don't think it's in there to the extent that the state expects it to be.
Yeah. I mean, we do still have that 2019 moderate income housing plan. That's an adopted plan of the city.
Yeah.
It's just not directly in the general plan.
Why wouldn't that have been supplanted by the new 2022 general plan?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. And perhaps it is because of what the state code says now, which is the moderate income housing plan is supposed to be part of the general plan.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have these additional new elements that have been added since that 2019 plan was done.
Yeah, and the consultant, right? I mean, the consultant completed all the work on this a year ago.
Yeah, before the legislature changed things.
So would it just amend the current plan then? If when we choose and decide, and then we would just amend it and add it to our plan and then re-approve it? Or just amend it and it's fine?
Yeah, so you would recommend that the city council, who's the land use authority over the general plan, that this is what planning commission recommends that you adopt and amend into the plan. And then they either adopt it or they don't, or they can make changes, as I said.
So maybe this is where you were going next, Melinda. If I understand, when you said 3 elements correctly, there's state code 10-9A4032 basically says the planning commission has to include the following 3 elements in the general plan. Number 1, it has to be a land use element that does these goals, that designates these goals. Number 2, a traffic and circulation element that does these things. And number 3, a moderate income housing element. Those are the 3 that you were talking about? Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the code on the general plan, yes, it requires that we adopt, or that the general plan has to have certain elements of health and safety, as you said, but then, yes, specific, the moderate income housing element it comes forward and says you have to choose one of these, A through X. It doesn't tell us what we have to for those other elements of circulation. It doesn't tell us that we have to have so many miles of streets or certain street widths. But the moderate income housing, again, each year, each session, they beef that up, they add more, they create more detail in that. So they are being very specific and intentionally specific about that.
Having watched this process at the legislature since 2017, my suspicion is eventually, if this doesn't work, you're going to see the legislature start taking over portions of zoning. And that's my big fear, is you're going to have Big Brother at the legislature impose something on the cities that they don't want.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what they're saying, like, well, other states have taken away single-family zoning altogether. So what does that mean? That means that, I don't know, the family that was just here with their conditional use permit for animals, and they have an acre, they could tear their house down and put 12 townhomes in, and we couldn't stop them. That's what they're saying they will do. Whether or not they really will, I don't know. But I could see them saying, or putting something in state code that says, you know, it is illegal to require any single family residential lot to be more than 8,000 square feet. They force the density on you. That's essentially, I think, what they're talking about, is that if we don't do it, and by we, they mean all 250 cities and towns in the states, if we don't do it, we'll make you. And again, you know, there may be some communities out there that say, okay, that's fine with us. There's other communities that, you know, want to be the good sport. They want to say, okay, we hear you, state legislature, we want to be in compliance. I can't say whether or not they will get a bigger stick, but they have every year since, right?
Listening to Senator Anderegg, they're going to get a bigger stick.
They're going to the big stick?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's...
How soon are they talking?
This has been going on since 2017, the first discussions on this. I mean, and then implemented in 2018 on the cities and counties. I mean, it's been slowly discussed. I would say the next 2 to 3 years, you'll start implementing. And it's kind of interesting in a conservative state that they would do what they did in Oregon about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, where they simply just took over all zoning in the state.
I was just back east for a week, and in downtown Philly and in downtown Washington DC, and for 100 years they've done these row house developments, and they're brick front and they're beautiful, and they're like 16 feet from lot line to lot line, and you just see blocks and blocks of these homes. They've got Porsches out front, and they're walkable communities, and they're, like I said, 80, 100 years old, and people love them, and they live there, and
That's brownstone.
it's beautiful. And that notion has been around a long time. But back west, we like these sprawling lots, and in Kaysville, you know, we're lucky if 5% of the people can afford the kind of homes that we build in this town. And but that type of thinking, the row house type thinking, that's one way to get there. The higher the density on the land, the lower the cost point is. You could be 30 to 50% below the average cost of homes if you could develop those kind of neighborhoods. And you could do it really tastefully and beautiful and affordable. But it's all the density on the land. That's the key.
Well, I think that we can go ahead and work with you to get the 5 items. I think the main thing I would be interested in is how we're going to measure this. Because to me, this is going to be a checkbox. We'll just do the 5 items and then nothing will happen. And so it's key to be able to understand how we're going to measure progress.
Right, my understanding from the state, again, is that the report is due, I think, October 1st. We will submit all this information and it'll be the baseline. So if that's how many affordable housing units, and I mean like actually affordable housing through the state, how many units do you have in your community? And if one of ours is to, you know, facilitate more affordable housing in the community, and then during that year, we've had an application come forward that would have done that and we deny it, I think that's what they're going to start looking at. I think they're going to start looking at what were your rezone applications? Were they passed? Were they denied? And I think that's the type of stuff that they intend to start looking at. I could be wrong, but again, based on my conversation, they're going to say, all right, city X, I guess, whatever city, Kaysville, you chose to implement these. What applications came into you during the year that would have been a rezone for density to assure production of moderate income housing? Okay, here's all of the ones that came in. Now, did they pass? Did you follow through with the commitment you made to us to adopt that and incorporate that into your general plan? Yes or no? And if no, then why? There may be a valid reason, right? I mean, maybe somebody applied for a rezone and it just, I don't know, some circumstance that wouldn't have worked. Maybe there's a valid reason for that, but I think they're going to start looking with a pretty fine detail as to each of these items and whether or not we've done it.
I got to say, if that happens, that would be shocking to me, because now, so you have a legislative body, an elected body by the people in every municipality, making a legislative decision on a rezone, and then a bureaucrat says, you didn't follow the code, in my opinion, as a bureaucrat. So I, as a state agency employee, am going to override the legislative will of an elected body. That would just be completely un-American. But anyway.
Well, I don't think that's what they're talking about doing. I think it was what Melinda talked about earlier, which is eligibility for certain kinds of state funding, mostly transportation funding.
Well, that's lesser. That's better. I will give you that. That's better. But even then, that's still a state employee, agency person. I mean, granted, in their mind, they're implementing state code. That's their task, and that's what a state agency does. So they're trying their best to follow the dictates of the state agency. You know, if I set aside my emotion and try to be a little more objective, they're trying their best to do that. I recognize that, but man, I guess my point would be if that gets out to the body of the people in the state, man, we should be talking to our elected officials at the state level.
Oh, it's already there, Josh.
Well, I know I get that, but I'm saying if they're going to try to tighten the screws in the future and say, you city are not doing what you're supposed to do in our, you know, sort of whatever opinion as a state agency, and they're trying to follow the dictates of the state. I don't know, maybe I'm just on a soapbox that's long since passed, but
I agree
that
with
seems
what
surprising
you're
to me.
saying. I agree, but shouldn't we be trying to be team players? Shouldn't we be trying to put affordable housing in Kaysville? Are we the type that are saying, not in our backyard, send it to Layton?
Yeah, and let me clarify what I'm saying. I totally agree, and I mean, when we get to the points, I have the top 5 and 2 honorable mentions of the things that I think we should be implementing in our plan. I think we definitely, and I am the first one to say NIMBYs, you know, be gone. But where I just raise an eyebrow is when we implement these 5 elements and they're in our general plan, and then the legislative body is trying their best to follow those things, and then a state agency says, nah, we didn't think you do it right. That's where I'm just surprised.
So I'm taking a look here in the general plan, and I mean, Melinda is right that we're not anywhere near what the state code requires in our general plan. Our 2019 moderate income housing plan is pretty close. Probably with a few tweaks, we'd probably be there, but that's not what's in our general plan. So we either need to, well, we probably need to move what's in our moderate income housing, our 2019 moderate income housing plan, into the general plan with some tweaks in order to be compliant with what the state code is now requiring.
I think what we adopted in 2019 is the easiest place to start.
Yeah.
There are additional items that have been added since that code was first passed in 2017, I think it was, but you know, I think that's the easiest place to start.
I mean, that 2019 plan, it lists all of these things. I mean, there's a lot of it that's there. And if we're still, it's an adopted plan for the city. If we're okay with it, then, you know, we probably need to just move it over into the general plan. But I do think we probably need to take a look at a couple of other things because there have been some additional requirements put in place since that 2019 moderate income housing plan.
So do you want to hear some fun numbers? If we took Ann and Tom Pritt's lot that they just came in to get the zoning changed for animals, and it sounds like they're going to sell their house to downsize and simplify. If we allowed an RM type zoning, you could squeeze up to 20 tandem garage townhomes on that acre. Yeah, depending on the width. You need about 16 feet by about 40 feet for tandem. A single car behind a single car with a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. That if the land was about $60,000 a townhome, which would give them about 1.2 million to sell that house, which I guarantee is more than they'll get now. You could build those kind of townhomes for about 220,000 each. With 60,000 for the land, you'd be about 280. Put the markup for the developer and the contractor, and you'd be in the 300,000 range for a nice little 1,500 square foot tandem garage townhome, up to 20 on that lot. And the Pritts get blessed, and the families that buy those small townhomes get blessed. That's some numbers that are real, because I'm developing some of these in Salt Lake City right now. And so that helps about 80% of the people instead of the 5% that we're now getting through this city council. And And that takes a lot of people off of crappy apartments and gets them to a nice residence in Kaysville with our great schools and great parks. So I hope we can come up with something that works.
I like that idea for sure.
You do not.
No, I do.
You don't like all the kids walking on the street and
No, I'll just
the
tell you
schools are
what.
overflowing. And,
No, hey,
and we're going to
listen.
run over kids and kill them. And,
No, not me. I
and
like.
the traffic will be too overbearing.
But look, let's
Woe is
just.
me, we can't have that in our neighborhood.
If we pulled up the map for the Pritz that was up here, that was probably, I think Wilf might have been on the planning commission, maybe Toby, 4 years ago, give or take. Well, no, it was in COVID because we were up in the DATC, I think.
I remember.
Yeah,
or the fire.
there was flag lots. Let's see them. Okay, so these flag lots. Where's the map? The parcel map.
The ones
Okay, right in front of us.
Right across the street from
The
Davis.
flag lots. Those 3 flag lots. So really, they were adding 2 single-family homes,
Yeah.
zone for that.
And people went crazy over that.
and that neighborhood came out like you would have thought it was a
The
skyscraper.
world was coming to an end. Woe is
So.
me. Our neighborhood's going to pot.
So I don't know how we get over that. That's the question we should be trying to strategize.
Well,
How do we get over that?
You put the zoning in place so that it's a non-political question.
You have to
And
give,
that's
you've
what
got to,
the
you've
state
got to
sounds
give,
like
you've
they're
got to give,
going. They're
you've,
gonna override
you've got to give political cover
Yep.
so that, and I'll say that, I mean, and a couple cities have done that. North Salt Lake has successfully done that. You drive up North Salt Lake on that Main Street corridor, and they are putting everything in with an elevator, 2 to 3 stories high, 3 stories or more. Same thing in Clearfield now.
Yeah, you need to go 3 stories on these kind of townhomes to make
But,
it work.
but you've got to do it in areas that it makes sense. But, and the other thing is, and I say it's kind of tongue in cheek, but how does it fit in with the city's active transportation plan?
And some states have that.
How does it fit in with the city's active transportation plan?
They've eliminated some.
More buses. No, it's a
You know,
fun discussion.
how are we going to develop it so that it becomes a walkable community?
Yeah, I wouldn't go there.
I mean, I don't know. I'll just jump to what's on my mind here. So I'm looking at just so we're clear, it's, okay. Section 10-9A 4032A.
What page you on?
Sorry, it's this page of the,
I'm
it
looking
says
at my
Modern Income
stupid
Housing
phone.
Report Criteria in the Utah Code.
Okay.
A says the 3 things I already talked about, which is the general plan has to have a land use element, a transportation element, and a moderate income housing element. Then then the code says, in the moderate income housing element, you need to have these things. And then it goes and it says, for a town, it may include, which we're not a town, and for other municipalities, which Kaysville would be, shall include a recommendation to implement 3 or more of the following moderate income housing strategies. And it's A, like Melinda has said, A through X. I think, here's my top 5. A, D, F, J, L, honorable mentions, R, and W. This is what I think.
Yeah, that's a little too fast.
A, D, F as in Frank,
A, definitely.
J, L, and then honorable mentions, R, and W.
Yeah. Go after the zoning.
But that's what you're looking for from us, right? Some of these things.
You've got to have
Right.
teeth in it and go after the zoning to make it happen, or the politics won't let it happen, and then we'll be mandated by the state, and we surely won't like what that could turn into.
Yeah, and that's, again, that's the threat.
Yeah, that's the stick there. Wilf and Steve know best. That's the stick that's kind of out there, ready to pounce.
Well,
right?
it's happening in places all around the country right now.
Yeah.
And it's been discussed here. The Commission on Housing Affordability's had discussions about this. It's been discussed in the legislative sessions. There's been a lot of pushback, obviously, from the league and from league members, with the caveat of saying, let's work on something cooperatively rather than getting a top-down state mandate. It'll be more likely to succeed if it's a cooperative approach rather than a top-down state mandate.
And
And so that's where they're kind of at
They're
right
ratcheting it
now.
up as time goes on until the results start happening.
The question is, yeah, are we going to get that cooperative
And I'll,
approach? Or is it going to get to the point where finally folks say, all right, enough is enough?
and I'll give you an example. I'm doing a project in Vancouver, and we've asked for a rezone, and they said, it's great, multifamily. You've got to do 60%, or you've got to do 40% of your housing as affordable housing at 60% AMI. And that's deed restricted for 30 years. And that is a state mandate. So all rezones for multifamily
That's a high percentage.
is a high percentage.
Can
And
you make your
so
numbers work on the development?
that's what we're figuring out right now. But we've gone in for the rezone now. But that's what we're at. That's what Vancouver's now told us. But that's the way the state's dealing with affordable housing. They just come in and said any rezone has to be done that way.
Yeah.
So you want multifamily, you're at 40% AMI, or 40% of them have to be at 60% AMI, and that's 30-year.
Part of the trick here is what the city's charging fees for building permits. I mean, some of these cities around here charge tens of thousands of dollars for permits. That's just another form of taxation, and I think we need to be looking at those fees, all the assessments that go into trying to build something.
So that's L on my list,
Yeah.
and R on my list.
Yeah. We got to make it easier for these developers to put their neck out there and raise the money and get the funding. And
L says reduce, waive, or eliminate impact fees related to moderate income housing.
yeah.
Frankly, so this, what's in the code that Melinda's just talked about, what the legislature passed this last year and what they've passed in the last year or two before that, these requirements that are to have a moderate income housing plan. The requirement to have a moderate income housing plan has been in the state code for a number of years, but it's been a relatively toothless shark. And a lot of jurisdictions were not even paying any attention to it. When all of this discussion, because of the housing affordability crisis that was going on, began, and some places around the country started doing the things that, that Steve has mentioned and others have mentioned, which is eliminating single-family zoning in some states, in some cities. The discussion here was, should we do that in Utah? And the pushback from the local officials was, let's work on some other things. We think we can do this better cooperatively. This was one of those things that fell out of that. All right, then let's make the moderate income housing plan something that has a little more teeth. You have to do something on this thing.
Yeah.
That was kind of a compromise to that in order to do that. So that's why it's here and why we kind of have to do some of these things with requirements in the code. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, was another one. Nationwide, that is considered to be low-hanging fruit because
Internal.
well, yeah, I mean,
We just
whether we
did
adopt it or not, it's now mandated in
Well,
state code.
we had to adopt internal by state code.
Yep.
But the external, like above the garage, what have you, detached accessory dwelling unit was not approved.
That was not approved, but that's not the way
Wasn't
that
required.
whole discussion started at the legislature. Accessory dwelling units are considered nationally, they're considered to be low-hanging fruit. Because really when somebody puts an accessory dwelling unit on their property, it's a relatively low impact in a neighborhood. It's really not a lot different than a family living there with 6 kids, or. Yeah. Hey, you know how many there are in this city? They're all over the place.
And
They're just not permitted.
But Will, if you go back and your career, I mean, where I grew up in Salt Lake City, up in the east side, I drove my neighborhood recently, and all the lots up there are 0.25 or smaller.
Yeah.
The houses are all about 3,600 square foot. But I drove around and counted. Within a quarter mile of my house I grew up in, there are 21 duplexes mixed in that neighborhood. And that's the other thing you don't see in the mix here.
Yeah.
Is the requirement, 500 feet now for this duplex. I think that's the other thing is we don't have a good mix, and the lot sizes are, we have this half acre ideal up here. And I think that's the other piece is we've got to vary lot size somewhat.
Yeah. So with ADUs being considered low-hanging fruit, again, rather than mandating that there be no single-family zoning or whatever like some other states have done, the discussion here at the legislature started out, all right, then let's make accessory dwelling units permitted uses everywhere, of all kinds. And again, the league and the member cities pushed back and said, you know, there are some concerns about this because of this and that and the other, and they kind of scaled it back and made it so that it's only in some cities and not in all of their residential zones, but in most of their residential zones. So they kind of pulled back on that. And then they also said only those that are in the main residential structure. It didn't authorize what you would call as
External.
the detached accessory dwelling units. So that was kind of a compromise that was kind of agreed to, but they did do that. They approved that. It's possible if they perceive that the communities are not making more progress on trying to encourage affordable housing, that the next step may be, all right, all kinds of accessory dwelling units now are permitted in all residential zones all throughout the state. And other things may happen. So
You got to override city law, codes, and also HOA laws.
yeah, yes,
The HOA I live in, you can't do an external ADU.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I would add E. That's 8 for me.
I almost,
Take your pick.
I want to give you my 10.
Well, and I mean, to the point, and maybe this is why Melinda said it.
But we have the list. We have the list that's already in the 2019 plan, which has a number of these in it.
Which I guess, maybe I have my attorney brain on that question on too much, but I don't know that, to me, that the general plan just, that's out the window. That's not even adopted anymore. That's how I would look at it.
Which, the 2019 plan?
The 22 that got adopted last week or whenever it was.
Yeah.
Swallowed
It's out of
that.
date already.
Well, and that, yeah, I mean, that's a good point because the state code now requires that moderate income housing plan to be in the general plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, so my other suggestion to staff would be, this isn't number 9. This isn't number 9. This is, so if you look at incentives and restrictions on the Utah Code 10-9A 408 5-8, 5 says that a municipality will get, quote, priority consideration if you implement not just 3 elements, but 5. I think that's what Melinda was saying. And I also assume that priority consideration means a whole lot of things for transportation funds or what have you. So I think we should, if we're going to do this, I think, what's 2 more, let's do 5. Let's try to get qualified for priority consideration if we need it. Maybe we don't want it or need it, but anyway, I think if we're going to do it, we got to do at least 5.
So they limited us to 5 or?
No, they
adopt
said
all of them if you
minimum of
want.
3.
Minimum of 3.
Minimum of 3. 5, you get priority consideration. 6 or more, you get
How many in
additional
the
stuff.
2019 plan are in here?
if we hired you, Josh.
All of them, some of them?
Can you put that up on the screen again with the list
Because
that we
maybe
have in
that is a
2019?
good place to start.
It is.
Just
I think,
tack it on.
because
Put
we've
it
got
in
a
our
pretty good
general
list
plan.
in that plan right there. There it is. See, we've got 9 items in that plan, in that list right now, in that moderate income housing plan.
Well, yes, although, if you look at number 8, and then when you go, okay, so number 8 is what the and then if we go to number K in the code, preserve existing and new moderate income housing and subsidized units by utilizing a landlord incentive program. They've
More specific.
added into it, and
And you have to include what they have dictated.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're
articulated.
saying. It needs to be more
And
specific,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I can tell you right now, and to answer Will's question for later on, I haven't been able to touch the appeal code because I don't have the bandwidth.
Melinda?
So, a program like that, we'd have to hire
I was gonna say,
staff.
what would this add to staff cost to you?
Sorry, what was that?
To implement this, what would this add to staff cost?
A landlord program?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's, wow,
Another full-time staff.
yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, so here you have now,
$100,000 out of general fund.
here you have now the state here you have the state implementing stuff on the cities that's going to cost taxpayers dollars. It's programmatic stuff that now,
Right, so
So choose carefully,
So,
right?
well, yes.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
if I
that's
choose
right.
K, no, I would not, because we do not have the capacity to add in some type of a program like that. And, you know, and I could also say that interesting thing about
I'm A, D, E, F, J, and L. I got 6.
I wouldn't choose any of those either, because
J and L.
if you
And then I
use
put
money
E.
from the general
And
fund
E?
to
Yo, I've got E,
pay
yeah.
for these services
Yeah.
or to augment and subsidize this housing, it has to come from somewhere else. So does that mean that we take away 10 police officers to pay for that? I mean, that's, like, there's no fat in any city budget.
Yeah.
There's just not. Is there a way to perhaps make a couple of those happen? You know, I don't know, but, I mean, building permit fees and impact fees on a single family residence, yeah, it's between $16,000 and $18,000.
Yeah.
But that, the whole intent of, right, the permit and the plan review fees, they're paying for the service of how much it costs to do inspections and make sure that those plans are in compliance with building code, which I think is a good thing. And then we're saying, okay, by adding 10% to our population, which we know we're gonna have I'm making up numbers here, but by 2050, we know we're gonna have to drill another well to be able to add more water into our system, and a new well and a new water delivery system is gonna cost $10 million. That's what those impact fees go for, is to pay for the new growth. Now, those people come and they don't pay those impact fees. The new growth, or that new well and facility and delivery line still has to be paid for. But how do you pay for that? One of two ways. You increase your water rates for everyone who's here, or you increase your property tax revenues to make up the difference. And so all of those, like, it may seem like low-hanging fruit, those are my least favorite. I actually had a conversation with a council member earlier today about kind of a preliminary request that we had on waiving impact fees, and he essentially was like, I'm a hard no on that. Why would we do that? Because then we're making the people that are already here pay for, you know, the burden that the new people would bring. So I think those myself would be a really tough sell to the city council. If I were as staff trying to choose those, they would be the ones that I chose, and they were in there in previous years. They weren't the ones that were selected in 2019. So I think those would be really hard to implement, to add in, but you know, if the consensus of the planning commission was those were ones that we want to look at, then that's what we take to the city council.
I wonder how rigorous those numbers have been come up with and how defensible those fee assessments are. Sometimes I feel like they're just as.
They're one of the most highly regulated things in state code.
Are they?
These are, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they really are.
They're very regulated and very, very, like,
Well, it's a constitutional matter, because they have to be roughly proportional to the impact that's being imposed, and if they're not, if they're excessive, then they're unconstitutional. And so as a result of now probably decades of regulation, it's very tightly controlled.
I mean, and I realized my microphone wasn't on, and now I'm talking so loudly, I'm sorry. But there's a whole host of things that you have to go through to adopt those impact fees. And here's our 10-year projection of all the capital projects that we would have to need, we would have to bring in. Now here's our engineers' estimates of how much those cost. You have to look at that. I mean, essentially, there's consultants that are getting rich off of the contracted fees that we pay to them to figure all this stuff out, because no city has the staff or the expertise to do that. So there's, I think, essentially 3 elements that you have to do to get to the point where you're adopting an impact fee. So that it's highly regulated, and Also because, developers don't like to pay them. And they're the ones who pass the laws to begin with, but, it's, those
what?
are,
You mean
You know,
60% of the legislature?
those would be ones that would be hard for, I think, any community to come up with. So would certainly not trying to cut the discussion off, but would the preference be to just kind of match these 9 items from the 2019 plan to what's in this state code and bring those back?
Do we want to do all 9, or do we want to do 5 and baby step it? Because we're held to what we're doing. That's the
Well, I think there
general
would
idea
be
is we're gonna
value to
held
do
it.
that, to see what it would actually look like with this language in what we had. Just like
Sure.
the example you just gave. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy to look
Yeah.
at this and be like, yeah, we should
Yeah.
do that. But then when you bring in what they've added
Yeah.
and the
Scary.
impact.
I mean,
so
your,
think-
your easy ones are the rezones, but those are
Yeah,
also
they are.
the
Yeah, the
ones that are
rezones.
not easy
Well-
because we have a council chambers full of people.
I was going to say they're not easy.
No, they're not. I mean, they seem easy, right? But then you have, the 300 signatures on a petition and the 50 people that we have to listen to that are adamant against it.
Well, and also just assessing where we've been with elected officials. And I mean, if we're trying to pick the ones that we think that would be supported and upheld by our elected officials, I think that's a tough sell too.
We'll be where we've always been. We got to put teeth in some of these. We got to go after zoning laws, or the state will impose on us. I mean, I don't know how else to do this. I've been looking at this stuff for years, and what we're doing isn't working, so we've got to do something else.
Well, and for that reason-
Housing costs are just exploding everywhere.
For that reason, I think like mine were very close to Commissioner Sunloff's of the ones that look like low-hanging fruit, that don't look so invasive, right? That we could, yeah, it's really easy to show that we are reducing, waiving, or eliminating fees. But then as you really assess the impact of that, and just as you articulated, where does that then come from? That's a tough sell as well.
Melinda, what do you think about T? I mean, there may be excess property the city has or participating with another city. And that seems like one that, let's say the fire district or the sewer district has excess property and, you could partner with them and work with a developer. I mean, is that one that you would look at?
I think that we need to do a better job of communicating to the public what the results are, the effects are of making these choices. I mean, I think any of these, like the ones we're talking about with the fees, it's going to be passed on to them in taxes or, so forth. So, I mean, we can either choose to not comply, or if we do comply, this is how it'll impact. I think we just need to let people know what the impacts are, one way or the other.
In either case, there'll be big fees, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's hard. I mean, that's hard to quantify or project because this is the first year where they've come and said, okay, we now have our baby shark teeth in.
And it's not very specific of what the
Bill
teeth
Kobe
are or what the,
Well,
what the
they're
bite will be.
saying.
Melinda, Bill Kobabe does not have shark teeth.
No, he's a pretty smart guy when it comes to planning, and I mean, he'd run circles around me, so in many ways. So, it's.
I replaced him in Morgan.
I believe, let's see, there's UDOT funds, Department of Water Resources funds, other funds that they're saying if you don't have those 3, don't bother to apply. And maybe we're okay with that.
To your question, Melinda, back to the 2019 general plan, I think that I would propose that that's a great suggestion for where to start. If we could match what we had with what the current language is, and then maybe in the next meeting, take a look at that and determine how comfortable we are with those 9, and would we substitute anything else that's in A through X and exchange those.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good approach.
Well, if you want my opinion, A, F, and J all touch on zoning issues
Those are the ones
that
I
get to the heart of the issue.
And A is word for
You
word
wanna
the
pick
same as
3 of
number
them.
9.
A, F, and J.
I like E too.
Sorry, what was that, Rachel?
A is word for
Yeah,
word the
me
same as
is
number
a-
9 on that list.
Yeah.
That's
Still.
that's,
So
everyone
that seems
should be able
easy.
to accept E, or E, yeah. But 3 that are strong on zoning, and E's a big one to get the ADU thing broken loose for external ADUs.
Yeah, and you know, I think there, I don't know, there may be a political appetite to allow, I mean, we have the internal, right? But there may be political appetite now that we've been through it a year, and we have 6 that are permitted. I don't know how many there are out there that aren't. We have 6 that have come through the process in the past year. When that was adopted last fall, I know part of the concern and the reason why the detached portion was not adopted was, I don't know how this is going to impact. Let's give this some time and see how it is. Well, I think that's a pretty minimal impact to come back and say we had 6 come through, you know, so maybe
6 external.
6 internal. We
Oh,
don't allow
just-
external,
Oh,
right? So
not
6
even on a
internal
variance, huh?
have come through and have their business license and they're permitted. I don't know how many exist out there that aren't, but
A lot.
A lot.
yeah.
Yeah, E's low-lying fruit, for sure.
But I also think too, there's probably not a lot of people that would build a detached dwelling unit. It's not cheap. Construction costs, right? I mean, it definitely,
These modular units there's firms in Salt Lake that are making these modular units, and for a little over 200,000, you can get a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit that's very nicely appointed.
yeah.
Yeah, they just drop it right on your backyard on a pad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the production of it is well underway. The modular industry is way ahead of the
Yeah.
curve on this one.
Yeah, but
The
still,
city
that's,
laws are not allowing it.
that's a lot of money though, you know, I mean,
It's a
to,
lot of money, but if your kids can't afford housing, but for
Sure.
$230,000, you can move them into your backyard, and, because you got such a big yard like I
Yeah.
do.
then you have less
I'm one of the
grass
guys
to
that'll
mow.
do that. And then they can do all my yard work and, you know. Well, I'm glad we're having this discussion, because I've been hoping we could do something like this for 3 years, and it just seems like we have lost so many opportunities.
Yeah, well, and it is tricky, right? Because each rezone application, each land use application has its own merits. And they should be decided on each of their own merits. And so is it fair to say straight across the board, you know, well, we had three rezones that came through and all 3 of them would have fit into this, but yet none of them were approved. Well, there's maybe, like I said, I mean, there's particular reasons why it was. And, you know, and
Well, and this change that was made to the state code that you mentioned now requires the city to report on what kind of progress they're making
Yeah.
on the adopted strategies. And, you know, if we say, well, we have this strategy to rezone properties to allow for more affordable housing, and then we say, yeah, but we had this many rezone applications and we didn't approve any of them, that's not making progress.
yeah, so.
Hold ourselves accountable.
So what does that mean? I guess then, you know, that would mean, hey, city, you've made no progress. So we're going to notify Wasatch Front and UDOT and all of these other people that take in the grant applications that you're not eligible to apply. Okay, like I said, I mean, maybe we don't care.
Well, but I think that's the thing though, like, people will say they don't care, but when the roads get bad and we have to pay for the roads ourselves, then they will care. And so that's why I think that they need to understand the ramifications for the decisions that are made.
Yeah. And then you can give people sugar, water, and vinegar and tell the same story both ways. So let's do this with the sugar water approach and get some good marketing help to tell the story in a way that people can understand, so they don't always come in here and fight us on these kind of issues.
Yeah, I mean,
Make it easier for the city council to approve it.
so it's interesting, right? Because I look at the language, and they're saying demonstrate creation of or participation in a community land trust, not just allow community land trust, right? So this clustering in residential areas, demonstrate. I mean, I'm not sure if that's what's in here, but they're strengthening that language. Like I said, every year they're saying, we've asked, and now we're going to tell you,
And then we're gonna force you.
well, and what that means, I don't know, but like I said, we do know what it meant last year. It meant that every single city in the entire state had to allow internal accessory dwellings. That's what it meant last year. What it means this coming session, I don't know. What it means 3 years from now, I don't know.
And I think on that internal, or the accessory dwelling units, it'll depend on what kind of progress has been made in the last year in new ADUs being permitted around the state.
Yeah, and that may be part of the reporting. I honestly haven't looked at what's required in the report to submit by October 1st, but I need to, because that's 5 weeks away. So what I really need is for people to stop submitting rezone applications so that I can do this other work.
I'll just put more on Mindy. And Abby will volunteer to help. Right, Abby? Oh.
I mean, they're getting very specific and detailed in the language, and that's intentional.
Yeah, they're starting to go for the juggler. They've done it nice. They asked, suggested, asked or told us. Now they're asking, and now next year will be forcing us.
Okay, so sounds like then my homework is to kind of do a contrast and compare between the 9 that we had in 2019, what that lines up to in the A through X, and to bring that back. And if some of those really don't align, like I was saying, I mean, the preserve for existing moderate income housing, if it's only at the expense of adding in a good landlord program, that's going to fall to the bottom of the list. So I'll bring that back then at the next Planning Commission meeting on September 8th. Is that the right date? Yeah. And then we'll see how the commission feels about that and go from there.
Sounds good.
It's good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
teeing it up.
All right. We have called the public. Does anybody want to speak? Called public? Come on up.
My name is Jason Larson, and over the last 30 years, I've been involved in commercial, residential land development in 9 western states, most of the municipalities from Tremont to St. George, so I've got some opinions on this subject. A couple of years ago, probably 2 years ago, I came before this body and wanted a project over on First North. It was 6 townhomes, so right in the kind of the subject matter here. And you all voted for it 7-0. Then we went to the city council and they voted it down. I don't know that they would have voted it down if, I don't know, 100 neighbors showed up and they didn't like it. So yeah, there's a real problem with the politics of it. And so when you mention, Mr. Doxey, changing the zoning laws and taking the politics out of it, that makes a lot of sense.
And the developers, if you can get more density on the land, you can cover the assessments better because of the density. So the city or the taxpayers don't have to cover it. It's just good economic sense and
Your per door,
Unit
your per door cost goes down.
Yeah, I am involved and built the townhomes just west of the post office here in Kaysville.
Yeah, beautiful
And,
buildings.
yeah, we still own them. And
remember when you came in that last time and
The last time
we
was
were
for the project
7-0
that,
and
that
then
we
the city
didn't
just
do.
shut you down.
Yeah, and, you know, if you remember what was there before, it was 2 rundown old houses. One had feral cats living in it and hadn't had a resident living in it in 4 or 5 years, right in the center of Kaysville. And so, I mean, it escapes me why neighbors, people that I go to church with, would come and not want, you know, what is currently a construction yard, you know, kind of the least valuable use, right, you know, 2.5 blocks from City Hall, where you want to put 6 townhomes, and it kind of alleviates some of the problems that you're talking about that's going to come down from the state.
And how much property taxes are you paying on these townhomes west of
It
the
goes up
post
every
office?
year. For 12 units, I think it's just under $30,000.
$30,000 a year.
I'll answer your question.
I mean, that's income that we lost.
Too much.
Tradition.
Tradition. Well, if you look at the history, I mean, Layton broke off from Kaysville. I mean, Davis High was the only high school from North Salt Lake to Ogden, and all the growth has gone elsewhere. I mean, going back 120 years, because Kaysville has a mentality of, I don't know if you want to call it not in my backyard, or I want a half-acre lot. I have a half-acre lot for sale here in town, and it'd be $400,000. And, you know, so if the dirt costs $400,000, how do you build a house that anybody in here can afford?
But you could put 10 townhomes on that half an acre if the dimensions
Sure,
are right.
sure.
And
it wouldn't be offensive. I don't think anybody in all of town would think what is across the street from Bowman's now, or Bishop's Park, it isn't a vast improvement to what was there before. And it's not, you know, it's not too dense. And I think it's an improvement all around. So I don't know how you get from a planning commission that recommends to the city council 7-0 unanimously, yeah, do this project, we think it's a good project, and then the city council has some neighbors show up. And the neighbors are gone now. I mean, one of them, they let 3 people speak. One of them was selling their house, and, you know, they're long gone. And so it's not like it was, you know, a long-term thing, or, you know, it escapes me as to why you wouldn't want 6 townhomes. You're not talking about duplexes or fourplexes or putting a strip joint in a residential community. We're trying to have houses that don't cost $1.5 million. So, I don't know, that's my 2 cents.
Hopefully, the adoption of the new general plan will help with that, because I think that's in the spirit of the new general plan, do you think? With the mixed use and the...
if the neighbors come out and force, the city council caves in every time.
Sure,
Yeah, that seems to be the process.
And so you gotta
So you
have
get
the
involved
zoning
in
place so that
politics
it
and
doesn't
try to
matter.
see some new faces, I guess.
Yeah, you just have to have the zoning in place so that the politics doesn't matter. This is the zoning and it's allowed. It's an allowed use.
Yeah, I think that
And
would
then we
make a lot
gotta
of
do
sense.
some marketing with sugar water to help the populace understand that if we don't do this, we could lose street funding, we could lose other grant funding.
Well, you'll get the
and whatever else the
legislature,
state
which is
legislature
full
comes
of
up with.
developers coming in and saying, you are going to do this, and it sounds like that's what you're saying they're getting ready to do.
It's probably better that we pick the zoning than the state picks the zoning, right?
Yeah, I would think.
I would think so.
So I don't know how you have the discussions with the council members to, like you're saying, with sugar water rather than vinegar, to suggest, hey, this is in everybody's interest. But
Well, it sounds like the state's forcing us to have that discussion, which I think is long overdue.
And I guess now we can listen to some other opinions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you still have that land that you brought in? So it's still available to develop?
Yeah, it's available. It's not for sale.
Good.
I'll bring a different project forward.
Hold on to it.
Mayor Roundy.
Nika Roundy, here's the microphone. Mr. Chair and Planning Commission members, thank you for letting us have a minute to speak here. I had a gazillion questions as I was reading through all of this stuff, and talked to I did talk to some folks, and I just came from a meeting with the mayor of Layton and one of their planning commission members, and they just went through this last night or last week or something very recently. And Joy says, "Well, I'll just come with you," and then she says, "Well, no, I've got other stuff to do." But I'm reading through this, and I had so many questions that I don't even know where to start. But one, would it be okay, along with staff preparing this that you've been asked to, could you make a cursory list of what transportation and grants that from the state that we would be losing out on, that we currently get? Because we were talking to this, saying, okay, so if we lose out on transportation funds, okay, we have, that's a UDOT road, this is a UDOT road. If the Wasatch Front has a project on their list and it's in Kaysville and we don't meet the criteria, but they're going to do that end of the project and that end of the project, but not this end of the project, that's going to be an interesting thing. You know, so I don't know if that's going to be enforced.
But I'll guarantee you, someone's keeping a scorecard of that kind of stuff. So in the big interchanges or overpasses, whatever might come that could benefit Kaysville,
Nika?
cities that fight it are they'll be happy to
So,
pass this by.
Nika, you work in the same department with me. I mean,
You know, Steve, I know you're speaking into the microphone, but I can't hear a word you're saying.
well, you know that we work in the same department. It's the B&C road funds. It's the quarter cent. That's what they're going to take.
So it's just the B&Cs?
It's the B&C. That's exactly what they're going to take.
What's the
Okay.
B&C?
'Cause
Well,
that's-
not yet, not yet.
But that's the discussion.
Yeah,
Wait
that's
a
what
minute,
they're
what?
discussing, but it's not currently part of the
It's-
Because that
withholding of
isn't
funding.
what it says here.
It's not B and C. It's the other ones that Melinda mentioned.
So
the
then
other-
I'm asking the right question
Yeah.
for that. Okay, great. As I was going over all of this, can you define to me who the division is? The division? Who's the division?
It's
Housing.
Department of Workforce Services, Housing and Community Development.
Okay, so that's who's been given the charge to
Correct.
play with this.
DWS HCD
Okay.
is the initials.
And then, I had another question, that maybe I go over here, is on page 7, C1, the Planning Commission shall establish a timeline for implementing each of the moderate income housing strategies selected by the municipality for implementation. How can a city control this? Just a thought. Just how do you control when developers come in, what they're asking for, what their timeline is, the city's timeline for them to come in? I don't know. That just seemed a little weird to me. But I appreciate the fact that you're going over this, and Josh, I had some of the similar ones marked that you did, and I appreciate the process that you were looking at for that. So I have issues with number 3 and number 9, because in my opinion and my experience when I've been before the Planning Commission earlier this year and got kind of brought up to speed on what is happening and that spot zoning is no longer a thing, it is the thing. We want to spot zone so we can permit multiple unit structures in single-family residential zones, and we want spot zoning to rezone for densities necessary to assure the production of moderate income housing, which basically takes away all the zoning anyway. So you're talking about the city councils shouldn't be denying anything, but I hope you have some deference for elected officials in their capacity of doing what they need to be doing.
Sure.
And
What the system has allowed in the past hasn't worked, at least in the city.
But the
So we've got
system-
to change something. Whatever the change is, we've got to change something.
the system, for me, as a citizen in a single-family residential zone, my only recourse is my city council members.
Yeah.
We can listen to all of Steve's hard things that are happening and to your, let's just do it all, but my recourse is only my city council members.
Well, that's not true. I mean, sorry, I'm interrupting you,
Oh,
but that's
please
not
do.
true because, I mean, if 350 people showed up at the state capitol during the legislative session to say, we don't want you to implement these things, they might feel differently. The problem is, people don't go there, they come here.
They do come here, and that's totally what you were talking about, educating the people. I can tell you, folks have no idea that single-family residential zones are about to disappear.
They're not.
They're not.
I know, you keep telling me that, Wolf, but I'm reading it here.
No, that's not what that says. It says as an option, one thing to do.
Yeah, it is, but then the city elected officials, if they deny it, then they have to report it, and then that's a slap on the hand if they didn't do it right. So there's a lot of things for y'all to discuss here, and I appreciate the discussion. I've been looking forward to this discussion. I was trying to create one on my own with my neighbors and invite you and the city council, but fortunately, this has happened. So I'm appreciative of this discussion and the thought processes that are going into this. So that's my thank you.
I'm Marilyn Mitchell. I own a home in Kaysville on the east side for 25 years. And I appreciate you letting me take just a few minutes, and I'll be very short. A couple of things that I'm concerned about. Yes, there's a disconnect between the city council and your commission, it feels like to me as a resident. Because I hear, I've talked to some of my city council about my concerns about like Steve Lyons was saying, it needs to be uniform at what we're going to do, because I feel like all I see for the density at all that I see happening at all is on the east side. I see it in my neighbor, because I'm on the east side, and I walk all over, because I'm a real walker. And I see it in the backyards. I see it like you just put up here on the east side. Let's develop that one. But I don't see any, and all the ones I see turned down are from the west side of any density, any affordable housing being considered over on the west side. And that's my concern, because I don't think any housing that's dense, I really want affordable housing. I think that's important. I think as a resident, I encourage that. I would want that, but I want it done so that it's not all in one. So you have a neighborhood that's just so dense and it's all in one side of in the area. It needs to be considered to be what he suggested. It needs to be considered for all of Kaysville. Let's not just have a rich side and a dense side, okay? That's how I'm concerned as a resident, because I feel like that's what's happening. That's what's happening. If you don't look around, that's what's happening. And that's my concern as a resident on the east side, because I think that we could make it nice for both sides and make it affordable on both sides. I don't think it has to be separate. I think you'll get more political and more divisive if that happens. So that's one of my concerns. The other concerns, I thought your idea of educating is good, but even sitting here, I don't think any of you even really know. What is the cost? It sounds like to me it's costing the city more than you're going to benefit, because the benefits are very vague. You say, well, you might get transportation for the roads, but nobody really knows. But then your costs sound very high for what we have to implement for the residents. So the residents are going to need to know. I need to know. If my taxes are going to go up, I need to know what's my benefits for implementing these things. What are the costs, benefits, versus what's going to cost me as a taxpayer? If it's going to help my transportation, my roads, or it's going to cost me $100,000 in taxes for one person on one of these items. That's just a concern. I would like to know as a resident what it's costing on both sides to implement these versus what we're going to lose. And I don't think it's very clear. It sounds like they're not very clear about what our benefits are going to be lost, because it sounds like they're just trying to coax us without really knowing. So anyway, thank you. That's real. And I saw your concerns too. Disconnect between your commission and your city council. And I don't know how you correct that. I don't know how you do that, because you're going to have to if you're going to do this. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll close the public here, call the public. Go on to the other matters, reports, correspondence, and calendar.
I think just the next things, our next planning commission meeting will be on September 8th, and that is also for those who registered to go down to the APA conference. We'll need to hurry back up here for planning commission at 7 o'clock, and then.
Can we do a math?
It might not. It might not be the best day. So, might not be the best day. But there was, I think, 3 planning commissioners that registered, and then Dan and I will be going down too.
Only 3 of us, huh?
Well, I'll be there.
Oh,
Okay,
Wilf will be
you
there.
Some of us are retired, so it's a little easier.
Yeah.
I'm going to the one in Salt Lake.
Wilf will be
I'm doing
there.
my best.
I was supposed to, I have to, work. Okay, I appreciate that.
But there's still other opportunities.
I want to go to the league. I think I can make that happen,
Okay.
in October, so.
And that one's the beginning of October, I think.
What's that?
The league.
Yeah, it's like the first week of October.
Okay, so we'll want to get, I mean, registration is open for that one. So we'll, maybe what we'll do now that the registration is kind of closed for the APA, we'll just send out that, that one for the league dates again and see that. They usually have a lot of good content on that Thursday, the Planners Day as they call it.
And then you have the
usually-
Utah Land Use Institute conference at the,
Yeah, and then the one
at the end of October.
The end of October, yeah. So that's another opportunity.
And that'll
those
be
that
the
are
main
getting
topics
peer
there.
pressure.
Main topics there will be water
Water.
and how not to become like California.
That's, let's see, I don't think there's really anything else that I can think of. So unless the commission has anything else.
Okay.
Great.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Steve?
So moved.
All right, so moved.
No easy solutions on this stuff.
I went to the APA conference last year, so.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear a lot of this.
Yeah, they have lots of great statistics, you're like, you walk away from there like, why are we not doing anything? We're like,
I'm working on a development.
Development means if it's got all of the utilities.
Three-quarters of an acre, and we're squeezing